I'm a rapper, rapper, singer, whatever, but rap was really my heart at that time, and I felt that I was at that place in my life where I was getting rid of everything that was causing separation between me and God. Music was obviously one of the last things because it was my heart for so long. And I went a few years like that, just, focused on my conversion to Judaism. And I really genuinely had no intention on returning back to music.
Welcome back to the JNS Media Hub here in Jerusalem, the heart of the Jewish people. I am here this time with Nissim Black. A lot of times here I have, some serious geopolitical experts, academics, longtime heads of Jewish organizations,
Right.
and this time, I have a friend with with an amazing story, who has touched so many different areas of society, of pop culture, and it's just a real privilege and a pleasure and a change of pace to have you here in the studio.
Thank you very much. I was with a group of guys who are all in different like leadership positions, primarily within the religious world. And so there was a particular rabbi who asked all of us to get together. We all took a microphone, each person, and said, who they are and what they're doing. So when I got the phone and the microphone, I said, Rabbi, I make a lot of noise for a living. I don't really know. It doesn't matter where it could be made. I just make noise. And I'm not always saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying like I'm loud.
I mean, I got to know you, seeing your music, seeing your
Yeah.
music videos, which I've come to enjoy a lot.
Thank you.
A lot of creativity in the
Thank you.
performance. I also love the way you put humor into the music, into the videos, into the lyrics.
Thank you.
It's and it just coming from New York, not growing up myself religious, you touch a lot of different worlds, and you get to hear, and I feel like you've come on a journey that's more difficult than mine. I was a Jew growing up in Brooklyn and in New Jersey. I guess coming to Israel is not
Mhm.
that much of a stretch. Even not
Right.
everybody makes it, but the odds are, people will say, "Where are you from?" I say New Jersey. So, well, that was a pretty good chance. And you grew up in Seattle.
Right.
You didn't grow up knowing anything about
Right.
Jewish faith, and
Right.
your path to Judaism wasn't a direct one.
Right. Right. You're
Yes.
you're actually right. So yeah, as you said, I grew up in Seattle. In fact, I always say I was born to hip hop parents, meaning that my parents actually pioneered hip hop in Seattle. So they were before. I mean, I guess who was back then? Sir Mix-a-Lot, I guess, was the big, most notable from Seattle, I guess, apart from like Macklemore or something. It's in terms of the hip hop space. So my parents started, I think, maybe 81. I think Rapper's Delight, first rap song came out in 1979. Although we have the internet now, we do know I think it was the Jubilaries that came out like in the 40s or something like that. But the first official rap song that we know of was in 79. So my parents started very early, like so by 81, which is before I was born, obviously, they had already started. And they were, young, having fun and, cutting records, but in a strange way, it wasn't connected as it is or has been to rap now. They were also drug dealers, both my mother and my father. So I always say I grew up, in the family business and started very young. And you're right, I was very much so like exposed to gang violence and everything. So probably not what you were doing in New Jersey. Found myself in a lot of trouble by 13, though. It's just so interesting because that's the age of bar mitzvah. That's when my spiritual awakening started to happen. Actually, it was when I was 13. That that led me to going to a hip hop program. I was involved with like a Christian organization, and so though that organization actually pulled me out of a lot of the stuff that I was going through as a kid. Like I was hanging out associated already with gangs, affiliated with gangs, um, getting into a lot of trouble early. So that was originally how it started. So definitely you don't get to Israel so easily coming
Well,
from
sure. Also, if you're in, let's say, a bit of a mess and a bit of trouble, and
right,
then you find evangelical framework,
right.
that's a good framework, right?
That was
A
a very
better
good framework.
framework than what you're
Oh
in.
no, because of that, that's why, people always say you're so soft on the Christian. Like, first off, I think they're Israel's greatest allies and have been. And it's only become proven more clearly as things have gone on. However, not only that, they saved my life. they literally saved my life, those people. So I have even though I didn't obviously stay on that path, so I have a big amount of gratitude in my heart for, especially for the people and the organization that was there. And because I was there, in my innocence, I saw and still even believe now that there are people that, even though we don't practice the exact same thing, and we don't, obviously we have some discrepancy on how we look at the scriptures and how we look at the Bible. However, there is a certain amount of just desire and passion, towards God, towards Israel, towards that is, admirable, that a lot of Jews don't have. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So because of that, I mean, just even over the years, as I've developed even more so, and a lot of fans of mine, so even my music, I started getting a lot of support from the Christian world. Just happened kind of naturally. Start getting playlisted on Spotify, and so I guess because I was singing in English and I was talking about God, it really resonated. And so I think I was in Texas, Dallas, and it was like the first big concert I was doing right after COVID. It was like 2021, that Hanukkah, and I remember going out, and the rabbi came over and said, "Nissim, we have never had so many, non-Jewish participants sign up for a concert." Like, so I didn't even know either. So I come out, it's like half of it's like Bible Belt evangelical Christians. They're singing along with all the songs and whatever. And it was a very like awesome atmosphere to be able to see. We have this idea of what we call Shechem Echad, like we're shoulder to shoulder with the nations, serving the God of Israel. Such a beautiful experience there. So
So
yeah.
what was it, if you were in this evangelical framework, and again you said
Mhm,
it saved your life, what
mhm.
was it that you felt you still needed to search for that you couldn't find over there?
So what was interesting was I was a big Bible thumper. So, which was untypical for a teenage kid, right? So I loved the Bible, and so I spent a lot of time reading. But I went specifically from Genesis, all the way through. At that point, the Bible consisted of the New Testament for me at that time. And so I was very much so in my Bible a lot throughout high school. And because the shift happened when it was, I was actually going into high school when I had converted to Christianity at that time. So, my middle school years, for a good portion of them, I was expelled from the Seattle School District. I wasn't allowed. So I finally, that year just happened to be, I say divine providence, some say coincidence, that I was allowed to go in to the ninth grade in a regular, normal high school system. And so when I got into high school, I was very involved in different groups, leadership programs, Bible study groups. And so I would bring a lot of people in. And so I always had a lot of questions because of that. Because I was always reading the Bible. So I had a lot of questions. I mean, I was reading it so much. I should have been doing my homework, but I wasn't doing it. So I was spending a lot of time. So I had this natural love developed for me of Israel and all the different stories that were taking place there. So by the time my 11th grade hits, I got completely distracted because a demo of mine made it to the desk of a A&R from a major record label. So then, and at that time, the biggest thing in rap was a guy by the name of 50 Cent, who I'm sure you never heard of before. And so because of that, they wanted a completely different style. So I went on this detour of like straight up making gangster rap, which I originally didn't think I was going to do. I felt I was always too strong. But after being presented, obviously, with a big contract, I thought, like, I'll just change the music. I won't change me. And then slowly I started to change. So it wasn't until the aftermath of getting out of a kill or be killed situation, I was in a very, really tough spot, that I was there, and I felt like, after everything was clear, I was I was at that point, I was telling the other guy was gonna go his way, I was gonna go my way. And at that point, I just felt like, you know what? I was much stronger than this before. When I was a teenager, I was already still at this age. I was 20 years old, I think I was. And I decided to pick up my Bible and read it again. And when I read it that time, I started seeing the special relationship between God and the Jewish people. And I didn't really recognize it before. I'd always understood it as, this is the church, this is the whatever. And so when I was reading by myself, I was like, hold on, wait, something's here. So I started, digging into it more. I ordered a few different versions of the Christian Bible. Ordered so this is another important caveat I should mention here. I grew up in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. I wouldn't say predominantly, it was a very diverse neighborhood, but I grew up very close to the Jewish area. So I used to walk through a synagogue every single day to go to school. So I would ride my bikes behind one of them. We used to play basketball outside of another synagogue over there. So I very much so was very familiar, at least with seeing Jews, but I wouldn't have been able to. If you would have asked me at the time, what's the difference between a Jew and an Amish person, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. So as funny as it seems, I wasn't very aware about Judaism, but I did know that there were Jews in my neighborhood. But I didn't have an opinion, good or bad. However, so after this moment happens of me reading the Bible again, I'm like, hold on, wait, hold on. This is about Israel, the Jews, and God. Let me start. So that's what caused me to start digging, and I digged a lot. I ordered a Quran. My first introduction to religion was Islam, actually, before Christianity. My grandfather was a Sunni Muslim. He came to live with us when I was about 8 years old. So he taught me how to pray. I pray with him 5 times a day in Arabic. He would take me to the mosque with him. Unfortunately, he ended up back in prison, so that's what gave me the leeway to get in trouble and end up in all the stuff I was. And then I ended up at that organization that I was. So that was sort of how that happened. So I've kind of already been through the Abrahamic faiths. And so what I did is I took everybody to court. That was basically what I did. I ordered 5 different versions of the Christian Bible. I had a JPS Tanakh. I had a Chumash, the
Yeah.
5 books of Torah of Moses, and then I had a Quran, and I was sitting there every day, about 8 hours a day, going between all the different texts, Rabbi Google, as I say, and there was something about the Jewish promise, and what really did it for me was the integrity, and I talk about this a lot, even on my own podcast. I talk about how if you look at the prophets, and this is probably mostly where Jews and Christians really agree, or at least in the evangelical world, a dispensationalist even, that God placed the entire integrity of his existence on the Jewish people. If you look at all the prophecies that talk about the end, the future, what's going to be, they all revolve the Jewish people, they revolve the Jewish homeland, right? And please God, soon the Jewish king. So the notion, the idea, as I was going through this, that there will still be Jews in 2026 as we are today, after knowing what Jewish history was, that was a very Betsy bet, right? Like, that was something that God really took his so he places integrity on the Jewish people, the fact that the Jewish people were there. So that was one of the biggest things that really hit me as I was going through everything, just like, well, hold on now. Because I had to learn Jewish history. I didn't know anything. I mean, I went through high school. I didn't know anything about the Holocaust. I genuinely like didn't know anything. So it wasn't until I was doing all my own research on my own, sitting, spending all that time, and it was a very spiritual moment for me, or time in my life, or period, I should say. I was spending maybe 3 hours every day, secluded in prayer. I was fasting 3 days at a time. I was really searching very, very heavily. And so eventually that led me through. I went through the Messianic route first. I ended up in a Messianic congregation. I was there for about 2 years, all the while of trying to catch up because it was a very much so advanced congregation. It wasn't like, there's a lot of Messianic congregations that are very similar to church. They just,
Right.
add some Jewish stuff. This one, they were praying in Hebrew. They had, talits on and and they were reading from a real Sefer Torah and all. So in order to catch up with all these, Jewish customs, I started going on Chabad.org from Chabad. That led me to a Chabad rabbi's house, and then he sent me back to the neighborhood I grew up in. It was a, very, very funny story. If you got a few hours, I'll tell you.
The 2026 JNS International Policy Summit will take place April 15 to 17 at the Waldorf Astoria in Jerusalem. Register today at jns-summit.org and use the coupon code JNSTV, that is JNSTV in one word, to receive 20% off all tickets. I look forward to seeing you in Jerusalem. So somehow you found Judaism.
Right.
How has Judaism impacted your music?
Tremendously. And the reason why is because I, for one, I retired from music. It was right at the peak of when I finally got to that place of like where I wanted to be. Long story short, my deal back then that I was telling you about before didn't go through. I had quite a few labels that were after me at the time, and I remember going to New York shortly after my mother passed away. My mother died of an overdose, so that was a very, like, tough time for me. But the promise of, the record labels and different things that I had kinda kept my spirits up during that time, and so, I remember going to New York, meeting with all these different labels, and I don't think I played my cards right, and I came back, and I waited too long, and long story short, I didn't have a deal. And, so I had released music independently. So all the while as this releasing the independent music, the story I told you before happens. I go on my spiritual journey all the while this is happening, and then I get to a place where I'm like, "There's no way I could continue making music. I'm just too in love with God right now." Like, you know what I mean? Like this, and I couldn't I'm a rapper, rapper, singer, whatever, but rap was really my heart at that time, and I felt that, uh, I was at that place in my life where I was getting rid of everything that was causing separation between me and God. If I felt like it was in the way of my relationship that I was building, it took it. Music was obviously one of the last things because it was my heart for so long. And at some point I realized that if I was going to prove it to myself that I was serious about this journey, by this time I'm already interested in converting to Judaism. I said, I have to be willing to let this go. I have to be really willing to slaughter my Isaac, if you will. And so I let music go, thinking that I would, but it was at the peak. I just started charting, like I was beating out, like I think Jay Z and Most Def on the College Music Journal. They opened it back up for me to go give a concert. I was on MTV and BET full rotation. This was like my dream. I remember I was at a concert. I think it was one of the CMJs, and I was backstage with my favorite rappers that I grew up listening to. And they're like, tapping their friend, like introducing me to, and they knew me by my name. They're like, and I was like, wow.
You were going by Danger
I
back
was going by D Black already
D
by then.
Black?
Yeah, Dangerous when I was much younger. By this time I was going by D Black. And so at that time, when they're, like, tapping to me, I'm like, "Whoa." I always thought that when I got to this point in my career, I would be over the moon. Like, I expected this, like, major excitement, and it wasn't there. Like, it was so dull in comparison to all those hours I was spending learning the Torah, going through all these different things, trying, to growing. And so, I remember after that, like, coming back, retiring from everything, so I thought. And I went a few years like that, just, focused on my conversion to Judaism. And I really genuinely had no intention on returning back to music. What happened was Judaism has a very favorable opinion about music, right? It's the highest spiritual component of connection to God is music. And I ignored everything. I always thought that to keep my religiosity and my music at the same time, it would be very hard for me to do. And so at some point, I just, there's a lot of points, but there was one point that I realized, and that maybe, let me say how to say this, maybe me not doing it, I wasn't fulfilling my purpose, right? And so when I was not fulfilling my purpose, that cut me deeper than anything else, right? So if I have a gift and God gives you a gift, then you should use that gift in order to honor him. And so that's probably the biggest impactful thing for me was that, and I always say this, you make music that reflects where you are in your life. If you're a real artist, right, you make art that reflects where you are in your life. Now, it doesn't always mean it's true. There's a lot of people that make music that's not truthful to themselves, meaning that they either haven't done or uh, they're not beholding of the things that they're talking about, but they aspire to be, right? They wish they were those things. So then they at least make music. The most beautiful thing about me was that since Judaism had already set me free as a person, that I've been more free than I've ever have with music. You have your times as an artist where you feel in bondage because there's people all the time that, tell you, "Oh, you gotta make this type of you gotta do this, you gotta do this type of thing," but I had never felt so free before, so
What are some of the principles that guide your music?
one of them has been, really, really prayer. The most, I guess I would say this is the greatest book of all time, or the I think it's the greatest selling book of all time is the book of Psalms, right? I think it's the Psalms. even before the Bible, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I think this is what it is. I think the book of Psalms is like beyond. King David and his plight and every up and down that he was writing from, through war, through, through the most traumatic, the scariest times. So vulnerable, vulnerability. And for me, that was one of my things. I remember I was in Jerusalem in a studio, and my brother-in-law, who Yosef Brown, shout out to him, he makes music, beautiful music. He presented a song to me that I was gonna go in and rewrite, but he presented to me, and it was so beautiful. And I'm like, wow, that's like I don't know if I can match the emotion he has on this song. So I kind of like kicked everybody out of the studio, and I walked back and forth for 2 hours, and I prayed and I wanted that song to come from a very, very deep place. And I sat down and I wrote the lyrics for that song, and and it took me to that place, and it was very emotional. And when the song came out, I had people telling me, don't put that song out. You shouldn't put that song out as a single. It's not that really like whatever. People that I was close to that were supposed to be, my advisors at that point. Until today, that was one of my biggest songs. The song was called A Million Years. And I remember after recording that, it set a precedent for me that all the music should come from this place of vulnerability, right? Being an open book on songs. Because once the words, they go out from the heart, they enter into the heart, right? Yotze min halev nichnas halev. So they're gonna come from the heart. And that is and for me, I've always said that if you have 2 to 3 minutes now, used to be 4 minutes,
Right.
as a song, 2 to 3 minutes, attention spans have gone down of somebody's intention, you have so much responsibility. When people listen to your music, they shake their head. They're usually in agreeing with what you're saying. The
Sure.
amount of power that you have over a person for 2 to 3 minutes as they're listening to your music is amazing. It's an amazing amount of power. So I always want to be able to be putting good things, good things. And from that I feel like I would be able to help the listeners, so vulnerability.
What brought you on the journey to Israel?
So the journey of Israel also came from the Bible. I mean, I don't understand how a person can read all these fantastic stories of what happened inside the Bible and not at least, want to go, visit the place. I mean, I think for me, I had this burning desire to move here just because it was the place, right? First, it started off as wanting to visit here, and then um, I think in 2013 it was when I actually finished my conversion. We were by a friend of ours, Larry Russack, and Larry loves to joke. I actually just ran into him yesterday. I was shooting a video actually just yesterday near Ben Yehuda, like in the central parts of Jerusalem, near Agrippa's and near over there. And I ran into Larry. So I haven't seen him in a long time. He's from Seattle. And so Larry stands up and he says, I'm going to take Nissim to Israel for his first time and his brother in law, Yosef. And we came in 2013 and I was in love, but I knew I would be. I was already biased. My heart was already leaning towards the place. So I came here, went to the coattail, but one of the biggest places that had the biggest impact on me was the gravesite of Shmuel the prophet, of Samuel the prophet, going there. I spent about maybe 6, 7 hours there, so just beautiful and terrain out in the area, not just in the tombstone itself. I went out to the fields and I was there.
Right. It's a commanding
Yeah,
there.
it was just such a beautiful thing, and there was something about even being outside of Jerusalem today is a very busy city, right? So it's a city, you get traffic, so you're subject to the same frustrations you will get also in Manhattan, right? Because of traffic alone, right? It's a different type of thing, but I understand. So one of the most beautiful things is being outside, like, on the countryside of Israel. And I start to imagine, like, who walked through this place? Who took their horses through this place? If the stones could speak over here. So just a real love for the land that made me want to move my family back here. So 3 years later, we did.
Amazing. So, you're on this journey.
Hmm.
You're deeply spiritual. You're
Hmm.
making rap music.
Right.
You've got all kind of different elements, in this music, religiosity, beats, humor,
Right.
everything. And now you're podcasting.
Right. Non podcast. You know what? Yeah, I know. I guess over the years, what I tell you what happened. Really, what happened was my first time speaking publicly. was for a Torah event, also 2013. It was the same year that I converted. We did this Thanksgiving Hanukkah rap, and they did a article on me at the time, and it went very viral. So they asked me would I come and speak, and so I'm like, yeah, I'll come there and speak. And they like have me up there with heavy hitters, Charlie Harari, like people that like do
Yeah.
this. I never spoke publicly before, and they like keynote speak. I'm like, what am I gonna do? So I got up and I basically turned it into a comedy jam for the whole entire time. They say when you're nervous, people are very funny. So after the first few things that I said that were not jokes but got taken as jokes, it kind of calmed me in. And then so I've always had this nervousness to speak publicly. You always feel like, I don't know enough. What do I have to contribute or whatever? And then over the years, as I've gone to speak more, I probably travel 100 days out of the year, so, and I'm probably speaking almost just as much as I'm giving concerts. And so over the years, it goes from that to like developing what I call rabbi syndrome. That's when they start having to say like, they're in the back going like this, like this
Yeah.
type of thing. So I didn't want anybody doing this. So I just said I figured I'd start a podcast so I could talk as long as I want. No, I didn't really have a desire. I first started, with interviews. And then after doing interviews, one of the things I kept getting was I was you know, I was working with people that were helping me set up interviews, and which they were very great. But what happened was the world started to shift. Um, Corona happens, George Floyd's killed, the whole everything as the world starts to shift, things are becoming more and more polarized. Now, as hip as I am, as modern as my music sounds, as everything is, I didn't have the internet in my house, even going back to Seattle. Maybe going on 10 years, maybe over something like that, let alone I didn't have a smartphone for maybe 8 years. It had been 15 years or so since I seen a movie, right? I'm just telling you all of this as modern as in the world and everything else is it had seemed that I was. I really wasn't that involved and I wasn't holding in politics. I didn't know what was going on in the world.
Well, that
So
seems better. Sometimes I meet people and they say, it sounds like what you do is interesting, but I don't really read the news. I don't really pay attention to politics. And I say, well, that's better.
hey, that's better. Yeah, yeah.
Like
'Cause you don't have
that's healthier. If you can get on
if
your
you can
life
do it
without that, do that. I said what we do here at JNS is for the people that are already addicted to
already
news.
addicted
If
to
you're
it.
going to be consuming news anyways, it's better that you consume this news than other news. But if you can stay out of that,
Yeah, yeah, it'd be great if you had other things that you were doing, and I very much so agree with you. Problem was, Corona happens, shut down everything. I had to get internet because I had to.
that was the
Kids
only
had to go to
way.
school. That was how they
Have
got
to
us all.
Zoom exactly.
That's how they got
We
us.
had we had all our kids sitting on different
On different
laptops in the
Zooms,
house,
yeah.
had to get different laptops in the house just that every kid
My
could go to
kids did
class.
so bad that year. You know why they did so bad? Because my kids prior to weren't really exposed to tablets or to computers or whatever. They just weren't. So for them, they were getting headaches from looking at the screens.
Yeah.
So me and my wife just said, forget about it. Whatever. They had a year chofshi, they're off.
Yeah.
They're off for the year.
Free year.
And so it was great, but I had to work. So I had to studio. So I had a study room, which really was my prayer room. I had one room that I dedicated only to prayer in the house. What happened? I had to
Became
bring
your
it
office.
became my studio,
Yeah.
and from my studio became like, my figuring out every 5 seconds, I'm checking the news for the first time. I hadn't seen the news in over 10 years, and now I'm checking, when is this thing gonna be over? When is it gonna be over? When is it gonna be over? And then in between, you're seeing, oh, this guy gets you're dealing with the
The news.
protest,
You
everything
got
that
the
was
news,
going on.
yeah. Now you got Black Lives Matter.
And because of that, what really sprung it was I put out a song, Motherland Bounce.
Yeah.
Motherland Bounce
We like
is
that one in our
very
house.
thank you. So, I got some backlash from other places, but it blew up in other parts of the world, right? And so what happened was because it was so heavily um uh geared towards, culture, black culture, being Jewish, like, this whole thing, but it sounded probably a little bit more hip hop than the songs that I put out previous to that. And so when the song comes out, George Floyd is then killed. Then it leads to me being, circled into this group of activism for, sort of like the BLM crowd. And I didn't know because I wasn't paying attention. I don't know what was going on socially, politics. I always joke, but I'm being honest. When I turned the TV off, Trump was the homie to the black people. Like I turn
Right.
it back on, it's like he's the villain. So you understand how crazy the world had become for me being outside and then coming back into the world. Like, hold on, what's going on? So I didn't notice it. I think I was on one interview, and I think one of the first things I did was Ben Shapiro's show.
Mhm.
Ben had brought me on, and it's so funny. I'm thinking about this. I feel like an infant. My manager was very strong, like, no politics. We're not gonna go into politics and whatever the case is. That's what they were telling Ben, and I'm like, of course, like he's not gonna come talk to me about politics. It's
Right.
Ben Shapiro, like so. I'm completely oblivious to what's going on. So we get on. Ben asked me a few different questions about racism or whatever. After that, since I didn't answer the way I was supposed to answer, I guess people were eating me up about it. And then so whatever, I was on another thing and we were talking about, race and all this other stuff like that. And I just had mentioned that I was just previously on the Ben Shapiro show. And they like stopped there, hey, please don't mention that name on the thing. And I'm like, hold on, what's going on? So you understand how much I didn't know what was going on. And so as things started to develop for me, and ironically enough, voices like Candace Owens and other people like that who were so strong at that time, it sort of helped me realize, hold on, was the division of what's going on in the world. This is where my world of thinking is, as opposed to that world of thinking. Because I grew up in an era and time when I didn't know the difference between a Democrat and a Republican. I just didn't know, whatever the case was. They told us, vote for these people. This is who you're supposed to vote for. My father told me, listen, we don't vote for Democrats. So I just didn't vote for Democrats. I didn't know why. The reason was because they were the party of slavery. That's my father told me, who is he's an evangelical Christian and pastor today. He changed his life, by the way, completely. So because of that, I didn't vote. I knew who to vote for, and that was it. That's what my father told me. And that was it. By the time I came of age, and so I didn't vote for Obama. I didn't vote for Biden or any of those other people like that. At the beginning, I didn't really know why, but then as time went on, and I'm starting to see what the differences were, I was like, hold on, wait. I just got grouped into a whole bunch of I said, "No wonder why people are looking at me like I'm crazy." I said, you know what I'm saying? Because these people are crazy. And so that led to me feeling like, "Hold on, I need to probably get start a podcast, go monologue, and say what it is that I actually feel so people don't start grouping me in with places that are not reflective of who I am." So that's how the podcast really
Well, in
started.
some ways, I've listened to a few episodes. It seems like it's a classic political conservative podcast.
Right. And it has developed and has come that way. I really started it wanting to focus on spirituality. That was sort of the angle that I was trying to come into. And then, I did one episode really because I started to notice what was going on. I started to see as things were shifting. By this time, I'm starting to really go monologue with the podcast. When I was doing interviews at first, it wasn't. It was much more, just digging into people's lives and that type of thing. But when I started going more monologue, I started to notice the shift that was happening with the right becoming this weird group of people, and Candace and, going the way that she was going, and Nick Fuentes and the Tuckers and the whole everything. And I started to see that thing go on. And then at the same time, I started to see what the messaging was. The messaging was this, you know, not just that they're anti-Israel, it's to delegitimize Israel and the Jewish people, and that's what started to get offensive for me, and that's what made me feel like I needed to start speaking about it more on the podcast.
So this has all come about of late.
Yeah, this is all recent. I mean, I wanted to podcast for a while, so it takes a while before you start realizing, like, hold on, let me do it. I'm gonna do it every day. You're saying I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. And by the time I actually started, it was like I said, started very spiritual focus, and then I started getting into more, as they would say, Hasbara, defending Israel, and then it turned into,
So
yeah,
what do
what
you
it
think
is.
it is about your diverse background and how you look and that
Mhm.
gives you a better framework on how to interpret what's
I
going on in the
I
world
think it
today?
goes back to what we talked about, which is we talked about, the principles that guide the music, but it's what guides me in life, and that's vulnerability. I am who I am, and I'm very proud of being who I am. And if I'm confused about who I am, you better believe I'm going to stop stop everything until I find out who I am, or at least where I am on a particular issue. Um,
How do you
yeah,
define who you are?
I'm a person who and I strive to be a person, at least I would say, after God's own heart, like King David, and that's really what I am. I'm a person that genuinely searches after authenticity, right? I look for authentic people in my life. I look for authentic paths to find God. I try to look for, the most authentic way to present, whether that's from a musical standpoint or a podcast standpoint, right? Probably took me a long time because I'm somewhat of a perfectionist. Some people call it perfectionist, but I say I like to be. I want it to come across as authentic and as real as it possibly can. So um, that's a key component of who I am. And I'm a Jew, and I'm on fire, Ivri Anochi, as Jonah said.
Yeah,
Hebrew.
how do people look at you in Israel? How do people see you?
I get a lot of love here, man. A lot of love here. I felt at home. I mean, I came here and landed. My biggest song probably in the Jewish world was Hashem Melech, God is King, that I did with God Elbaz, which really, by the way, is a whole story to itself. But I released that song maybe month and a half or so before I made Aliyah, before I moved to Israel. And now by that time, I didn't know that, I knew that I was going to pursue now by this time making music again. Um, we put out the song, it goes viral, much more than what I thought it was going to be. It like hit number 3 in the world charts. And when I land in Ben Gurion, they're playing it in the airport, and I'm like at home. It's like that whole
Yeah.
I always compare that time, which was a little bit different for me because I lost my voice. God made sure I didn't have a voice by the time I landed here in Israel. He gave me a new voice after I got here. I was completely whispers when I got here. I just lost my voice. And so I land in the airport and my songs are playing, and there's all these reporters, they want to do interviews with me. I didn't know how viral. I knew the song was viral. I knew, the internet's internet, but you didn't know, like, by the time I got to Israel, people were gonna know, like, really who I was. I was getting the vibes from Nefesh Ben Nefesh, as it was coming, but when I landed here, it was like crazy. There was reporters coming to my apartment at 10 o'clock at night trying to do interviews. And so it was a surreal moment for me, but it really felt like that, Ali Boumaier moment, you get to Africa, Ali's about to face, I think it was Frazier at the time, and then the whole, like, he probably did. It was a surreal moment. Landing back, here, or landing here in Israel, for me, it was my second time being here, but being home. So yeah, I love it here. And I wouldn't trade it. Like I said, this place is so magical. Can you imagine? I came here 2013, right? Was the first time I was here. First trip to Israel. And while I was here is when I got my invite to the White House's Hanukkah party. Obama was the president at the time. And I got this invite, and I already, by this time for sure, I wasn't necessarily a fan of Obama. Like I said, I didn't care about what the politics of right or left was. I didn't appreciate, his relationship with Israel at the time. So I remember contacting my Rabbi Arush, and got in touch, and he said, "You have to go take him the book, The Garden of Amuna," right, the Garden of Faith. So after that, that's his big thing. You got to go distribute books or whatever. So I remember I ended up going to DC. I left Israel. I went home for about a week in Seattle. I was still living at the time. And then I went to DC. And I was walking downtown DC, and I'm looking at all these old government buildings and everything. And they're like, "Oh, this one is this old." Whatever. It's like, hold on, you don't understand. I just got back from Israel. I saw places that were 3,000 years old. Like, you're trying to tell me, like, I was just so unimpressed with DC. It's beautiful in itself,
Beautiful city.
but it wasn't a good trip to go on and appreciate right after you came from Israel and seeing Israel. So, but yeah, love this place.
Well, you say it's magical, but
Hmm.
we've gone through some tough times over the past few
Right,
years, right? We had
right,
this war on 7 fronts.
right.
It's probably not over.
Yeah,
And we've seen how people that we thought were our allies abroad, are quickly turning on us.
right, right.
This has been, part of the subject of some of your podcasting.
Hmm.
Tell me where do you see Israel today, like in the world stage? Where does Israel fit? What are people not understanding about what's going on over
I
there?
I think one of the biggest things is who are we talking about, right? So when we think about this, we have to think about who are those French people? And these are really, as we say, from the four children,
In the
in the
Passover Haggadah,
Passover Seder
Passover Seder.
and the Haggadah. Like, there's one child that doesn't know how to ask, right? There's one
You
child,
have the wise son, the
the
wicked
wise
son,
son, you have the wicked son,
the
you have
simple
the
son, and the
simple
one that doesn't
son
know.
doesn't know how to ask, and then the one you're like, and the one that's just way off, right? So the one that's just way off, the wicked son, right? We'll talk about that one, which is all these crazy protesting pro terrorist groups and whatever the case is, and all the different variations, right, left, whatever, far right, Islam, whatever, doesn't matter. We are trying to get to the one that doesn't know how to ask. The wise son, the simple son, most people that are simple, most people that have real intelligence, they're not being fooled by this. They know what's going on. They could see, they could differentiate between darkness and light. They could see the difference between it's the people who are the people we're trying to get to, who we're trying to save them from the crazy people. The wicked ones can come off also as intelligent, right? But it becomes false. You have the most intelligent person, and he's got the pro Hamas, pro IRGC stance, whatever the case, comes off as very intelligent. In order for him to get to that position, he has to ignore so much good, and he has to take so many different things that are easily, double standards that he's applying on Israel in order for him to arrive at the conclusion. He can't have it straight because there's so much good that Israel has brought to the world that's undeniable. In the what an asset it has been for the United States, even as a whole. Like, to come to the conclusion of Israel being this demonic force of like, you'd have to.
Like, have you spent 5 minutes over it?
Yeah, like, have you
Yeah.
so like I'm saying, it's so far off, there's a such thing as being so intelligent you end up sounding stupid, so that's what I'm talking about. So when I'm saying pure intelligence, we're not talking about IQ. IQ is expensive, but we're talking about common sense, which is not always so common. So for me, a lot of what I have been doing is trying to speak to get to that audience, right? I think we've done so much, and I think a lot of what we're focused on, and I'm talking about those who are from the pro-Israel camp, Jewish, non-Jewish, whatever the case is, have been on combating this in a head-to-head all the time of trying to sway people. They're not interested in being swayed. First off, you have to have a love for truth. You have to have a true affinity for truth to be able to have a conversation and to have a battling of the minds. However, if you are not interested in that, there's nothing you could talk to you could talk to them till the till this till you tell them that the sky is blue, it's obvious blue. They're not going to believe you because they're already convinced of whatever they are, because they're interested in truth. They're interested in the propaganda. They're interested in whatever the end goal is, right? And so I think that in the world stage, I don't know if we're doing as bad as we look. The internet is extremely loud, and usually what happens is, they used to say, where I come from, usually the loudest ones, they get knocked out first.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, knocked out first. They didn't really have the strength that they wanted. And so one of the things that we've seen with Elon Musk revealing what's going on with all these bots and all these other, I think as time goes, we'll start to see that what we're fighting against is a deliberate plan to delegitimize Israel right now in the eyes and in the world, or in the court of public opinion. However, I don't know how much ground it's actually taken, but I do feel that the need is to strengthen the people who are like don't really know what's going on right now. They're really trying to make sense of it, and so I think that that's where the battle is right now, is for the people who don't know how to ask, so to speak.
And what's been the reaction to the podcast so far?
I've been getting a lot of love from people, and whatever. Obviously, the opposite as well. That's just inevitable. I mean, at this point, I think that the online bullying and anti-Semitism has gotten so bad. Another thing that drove me to even want to do the podcast and start to take the stance that I was very much so in a kumbaya. Let's just more love, more light.
Right.
Let's do that. And that
Exactly.
was
And now,
my that
now
was
you're doing reaction videos to Nick Fuentes and
right.
Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson.
Because and by nature, I'm not a confrontational guy. That's just, even when I was in the streets, all that, like, I was never starting things. I may have finished some stuff, but I wasn't starting anything. However, what happened was just, simple things I would see that I would post about, about love, about faith, about whatever, and I get so much, anti-Israel rhetoric or whatever. It had nothing to do with Israel, had nothing to do with anything, and I was just getting like it didn't matter what it was. I did a video with the Miriam Ezegwai about, I think maybe Shomer Nagia or, or not touching the opposite, like explaining Judaism, family stuff, and so much hate and all that in the comments, and I'm just like, wow, this is crazy. So those were one of the things that really sparked it for me. Like, I felt that it was very necessary to start speaking out, especially as a person, a Jew of color. They use everything, oh, it's racist over there and all this. Is like, which place isn't? Everybody thinks they're better than the next person. However, in the case of being in Israel, that's not actually, you know, even in the very ultra orthodox communities here, where um the say racism. If you wear a blue shirt, I mean, come on, like, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? If you wear a
right.
blue shirt, you make it a tomato. So let alone your skin color is different. But what I found out here in Israel, and I tell people this a lot of times on small things that maybe my kids I didn't encounter too much, whatever. But the kids or whatever, it's really it's not the same as where in America where there's a prejudice of civil, what happened during Jim Crow and all these other things like this. So the stereotypes on you because of the color of your skin, right? I didn't experience any of that here. Any problem to have with anybody? I mean, you could break that down to be friends because it's just you literally only look different, only see what I see, right? After people meet you, they talk to you, whatever. It's gone. It was like it never even happened. Helping you out every 5 seconds, you're getting it. You come to my house. There's every Jew's there. It doesn't matter what color they are, whatever the case, doesn't matter how ultra orthodox, how not affiliated, or whatever the case is. This place has really felt like a home for us.
And you mentioned your kids. What are some of the principles that you try to guide your as a parent?
Well, one of the things that I try to guide my kids on is really, really sticking to the guns and sticking to what you already know, right? I think that has been one of the biggest challenges, just in society right now, is that we are at a place where it almost feels like, in a very insulting type of way, that people, um, the world as a whole, whether knowingly or unknowingly, have been trying to insult our intelligence, make us not feel the things that we know to be true. And it doesn't matter how religious the institution is or how not religious the institution is.
Sure, it's certainly true
Very
in mainstream media, social media.
mainstream media, social media, all these other things, everything is out to get you to believe in whatever narrative that they're trying to push on you. The things that we learn at home, the things that we are. My kids are in beautiful schools, loving schools, and they are teaching my kids certain things, how to learn. But as a home and family unit, right, we have our principles, and our principles we're going to be strong on, and these are the things that I'm imparting to my kids and not to move from that place.
What are some of
They're
those
taught to love
principles?
themselves,
Yeah.
right? Love your color, love who you are. My kids are taught to love God. We love Eretz Israel. I'm
The
very
land of
big
Israel.
on the land of Israel. I'm very big on my kids not littering, right? So these type of things, we don't throw stuff on the floor. This is a very holy land. We shouldn't throw stuff on the floor anywhere, but in Israel for sure. Whether this is this is
Holy
so
land.
yeah, this is holy land. So how we respect other people, there's the kids very busy with
Israelis, by the
the
way,
different jokes.
don't always project some of these values.
Yeah, yeah, Israeli, yeah, yeah. So a lot of our American values that we have, like we're not going to bump and cut people in line. I'm very big on these type of things,
Yeah.
manners. If adults, you get on a bus and you see there's an adult there, you don't go sit in that seat. You get up and you let the person sit down. So these type of principles, I'm trying to be very strong. It happened one
Values.
time in my wife.
Yeah.
She was going to get, I think she was in a line to get ice cream, and you come here, you're American, you're new to the Middle East, and you have no idea how anything works. And she's just like, she maybe got cut like 30, 40 times, like it's just no line, out of order. Everybody's going and cutting it. Like, the person serving, whoever comes to them first. She doesn't know this yet. And she's getting so frustrated. And the guy, he stops her, right, and he says, "You come," he sees her, and he said to her, "Don't change. Don't allow the surroundings to change you. You stay who you are. We need to learn from you," right?
Beautiful.
And I think that that's been an important thing for me also too. It's not about, obviously to come here and to learn the language and to absorb as much as you can of the culture, but in the grand scheme of things, we're all Jews coming from the diaspora. So it doesn't matter how many years you've been here or how long your family's been here. At the end of the day, Americans have a lot to contribute to Israel and society and the way that it is, and in terms of those type of things specifically. And I think that keeping those principles and teaching them to the kids are very important.
And where do you think this country is going to be in a few years from now?
And a few years from now, it's a very good question. Um, we can
It could be aspirational, like you said. Sometimes your music is it's not a reflection of where you are today, but where you aspire to be.
hopefully, um, and I obviously have very, very big hopes for what could be in a few years, but I think, hopefully we're able to uh, reshape how things are looking on the international stage for Israel right now. Like the for those people, like I said, the ones that don't know how to ask. I'm hoping sort of that, in order for that to happen, we need the world to get back to some place of normalcy. I don't know how that works, but um, hopefully Israel's thriving, economically. Hopefully the internal things cool out also too. There's a lot of, with the army and different things like that with the religious community. I think there's a major push, and I think it's gonna have to come from the young people. It's gonna have to come from the young people who are willing to give concessions where there needs to be concessions on all sides, and to be able to build this place to be a place that's comfortable for every person. Like I said, the American, you come here, you can get into a world of trouble. You don't know how to read the mail for the first 5, 10 years. I've had that story, and I'm like, oh, hold on, wait, I didn't know that said that. I just put it in the drawer.
Well, you
You know,
started reading the mail. I'm not sure I'm reading the mail yet.
you're not up to reading the mail. Just accommodating each other and looking after each other. But this, I always tell people, still, even on our worst day, there's nothing like it. Even on our worst day, there's nothing like it. But hopefully, like I said, economically stronger, hopefully more peaceful, man. I mean, the it's awesome to be able to tell over these wonderful miracle stories of what just took place during the 12th Day War and all these missiles that didn't hit. And like people are looking at this going like, wow, look at Israel. They're just so strong, so powerful and all that. And that sounds good on paper, but the amount of help that we are getting from heaven right now, the
Unbelievable.
small,
So many
it's just
miracles.
so many miracles. And it's great to tell those stories, but, there's also smaller miracles that don't have to involve ballistic missiles and different things like
That
that. So
takes more
it
miracles,
takes some
right?
small miracles
Yeah,
also.
yeah, yeah.
So,
The bigger
hopefully,
ones are done.
much more peace. I really, really think that we can that hopefully, and we're gonna need it. I don't know how, I don't know what, none of us know what comes after 2028, honestly, with our biggest allies in the US. So I think right now is the time to make that groundwork.
How do people listen to your music?
People listen to my music, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube.
I like watching
That's
the
it.
videos on
Like the
YouTube.
videos. Listen, I take my videos very serious, and
Could
what a
see
lot of
that.
people don't know about me is I am a geek. So I love video, film,
One of my favorite
music.
videos is Best Friend.
Oh, best friend. Oh, that was fun.
Really
I think
fun.
we did that one out here in
Yeah.
Rishon LeZion, in Israel, and that was fun. That was a lot of fun. But I love the visual aspect. I actually write. If I could make a video for every single song that I do, I would, because I write thinking about the video more than I think about the actual song. I'm visually picturing what it is that I'm saying. So I love that. So yeah, if you want to watch the videos on YouTube, I actually that you make me happier if you would watch the videos on YouTube as
And
well.
how do people listen to your podcast?
Podcast is also on YouTube, Spotify, every place where you listen to your podcast. You can catch us there.
Nissim Black, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And the coffee is good also too. I'll come back even.
Looking forward.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.